Welcome to the first episode in our series of webinars. We're so glad you could make it. My name is Meredith Thomas, and I'm lead account manager at Babylon. I'm so excited to tell you a little bit about the history and future of farming, as it's such an essential part of our daily lives. Let's get started. To start off our presentation, here's a little background. Our company is named after the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The gardens were reportedly created by King Nebuchadnezzar II for his homesick queen, Amytris, who longed for the green gardens of her homeland. Babylon was the capital of Mesopotamia, and the gardens were beautifully tiered, featuring a wide variety of trees, shrubs, and ornamental plantings. They were believed to have been irrigated using a device called an Archimedes screw, named after the Greek mathematician and inventor. It drew water into ditches, effectively creating a hydroponic system that allowed plants to flourish in a desert climate. And it created a lush backdrop to the palace courtyard. Sadly, no trace remains of this ancient wonder. However, when contemplating what to name our new company, co-founders Alexander Olson and Graham Smith decided that Babylon would be an excellent choice as an homage to the first vertical gardens on record. Another ancient civilization famous for their innovating farming techniques were the Aztecs. Their methods included both terraced farming to make the most of the hilly terrain, prevent erosion, and allow for crop rotation in a form of hydroponics. They floated crops on Lake Texcoco using hand wooden mats covered with soil, leaves, and what was essentially compost. The lake was shallow, and they anchored the mats to willow trees on the shore, pulling them in to plant and harvest. Because the Aztec Empire included large urban areas with high-density populations, food production was vitally important, and the Aztecs are considered to be one of the most expert agrarian civilizations in history. Food is incredibly important, not just because we need it to survive, but because it is an integral part of our history and our cultures. Anthropologists speculate that the advent of modern human civilization was a direct consequence of the invention of agriculture as a model for sustaining early cultures. Food, how we eat it and how we grow it, sustains and nurtures us and helps us build cultural traditions, some of which go back millennia. Breaking bread together is a way to share not only food, but to create bonds over something we all have in common, our connection to food. Also, where and how we produce our food has major effects on our environment and is often a compelling place to broach conversations about sustainability and how to responsibly grow our food. Our farming habits have changed since we first walked the earth as hunter-gatherers. Originally, our food sources did not extend beyond what was a walkable distance, and people ate what they could forage or kill. Farming local foods was all that was available to us until overland trade routes like the Silk Road, a set of trade routes stretching from China to Europe, dating from the 1st century BC, became the first food highways. Used mostly for silk and other high-value items, a large trade economy grew up around the routes, and they were also the first regular means of cultural exchange that allowed people to sample other cultures' foods. Non-perishables like spices, a very, very valuable set of early food commodities, were transported on the Silk Road. There were dried fruits like figs and apricots that made their way from the Roman Empire to grace the tables of Chinese dynastic palaces. We take for granted the presence of certain foods in our diets, but until relatively recently, the 18th century, Europeans had never seen an apple or a tomato. And we certainly did not have access to bananas and pineapples in the continental US at that time. The number of foods we are able to farm now is exponentially larger than what was available to us before caravans and ships began to bring examples of non-native species, and the seeds were saved and sown. The 19th century saw even greater changes. Cyrus McCormick invented the first mechanical reaper in 1834. Before that, a sharp sickle was the best tool we had for harvesting, and the Industrial Revolution impacted how food could be processed. Add to that the invention of electricity and refrigeration and the invention of automobiles. which meant trucks were available to transport food longer distance in much shorter amounts of time, and the evolution of modern agriculture began to take shape. Transportation of food on trucks allowed the climate to be less of a factor. People in New York could now eat oranges grown in Florida, for example. The invention of the tractor was the defining moment in history where mechanization changed everything. Do you remember watching tractors as you traveled through the country or visited farms? Your parents and grandparents probably remember the earliest ones made. First, we had tractors with metal wheels and tiny engines that grew into huge combines like the ones that are used today. Farming is no longer just a way to feed your hometown. It's a big global business. In uncertain times, having control over our food supply provides us with peace of mind. As an island nation, Britain during World War II was particularly vulnerable to the disruption of their food supply, which had been largely imported. The shipping lanes were so compromised by enemy attacks that to avoid famine, the entire country shifted its focus to food production, and victory gardens were started on every available plot of ground to feed the nation, organized by the Women's Institute, which is still in existence today. Not only was the fresh produce consumed, it was canned, frozen, dried, and stored. Potatoes and apples were kept in cool, dark places and lasted months out of season. Every possible technique of preservation was employed, and it worked. When war threatened the ability to survive, Britain rose to the challenge and fed the country by pivoting how they fed themselves and warded off starvation. Another country that was drastically affected by World War II was the Netherlands. They were blockaded by the Nazis and began an enormous effort to recenter their food production into a local system. Historically, they had been on the cutting edge of inventing new farming techniques. As a low-lying country, they had to build systems that drained wetlands to create farmland and pasture. This started a national farming movement that has continued to outstrip other countries in terms of productivity and crop diversity, including building the most advanced network of greenhouses in the world. Controlled environment agriculture has been an economic driver, and what grew out of adversity has become a major industry that is a pillar of their economy through increasing their export income. Now let's check out this video on how the Netherlands learned to feed the world.
The Netherlands is a small country. It's so small you could fit it into the US 270 times. But it's big when it comes to making food. Remarkably, it has the second largest agricultural exports in the world, mainly through being able to produce vast amounts of food on tiny plots. Here's how the Dutch learnt to feed the world. The Netherlands isn't exactly designed for mass farming. Because of limited space, farmers have learned to eke out as much as possible from the land. With a third of the country under sea level, the Dutch mastered how to make land using levees and built windmills to drain marshland to create fertile soil. This area just outside of Amsterdam, Flevopolder, is the largest artificial island in the world and didn't exist half a century ago. Nowadays, over half the ground in the Netherlands is used for agriculture. It makes more food than its people can eat. But there was a time when the Dutch faced starvation. 1944, and the Allies begin to liberate Europe. The Nazis occupy the Netherlands and begin a blockade of the north. It created a food shortage so severe the Dutch government encouraged its people to forage for acorns and chestnuts. Tens of thousands perished from famine. After the war, as the Dutch rebuilt, ensuring food security became a priority. The issue was important to the new Minister for Agriculture, Sicko Mansholt, a former farmer and a resistance fighter in the war. He'd begin to drive changes that would turn farming into big business. Before the war, Dutch farms operated like those in most other countries. Small plots had a few livestock and produced a mixture of seasonal crops to service local populations. Mansholt wanted mass production and built on a decades-long system of state support for farming. He pursued a policy of land consolidation. Larger, more productive farms were encouraged to absorb smaller, less profitable farms. It was all about using less labour to improve yields. In 1963, the government launched a fund to help older farmers sell up and to help young farmers start new businesses. State funding into research and technology such as fertilizers and machinery followed, and thanks to aid from the US Marshall Plan, numbers of tractors rose quickly, helping farmers work more land. Dairy production grew fast as cooling tanks and milking machines were invented. In 1960, the average Dutch dairy cow would produce 4,200 kilograms of milk per year. In 2007, this had nearly doubled to 7,880 kilograms. Oversupply of milk wasn't a problem. The dairy board created Joris Driepinter, and he encouraged kids to drink plenty of it.
Nou, heel gewoon hè, 3 glazen melk per dag.
But technical innovation didn't stop with machines. The Dutch pioneered specialist greenhouses, creating conditions that would result in many more plantings than ever before.
These greenhouses are in the southwestern section of the Netherlands, and they enable farmers to grow crops the year round. With temperature and humidity carefully controlled, an elaborate water system keeps the crops properly moist.
If you were to put all of the Dutch greenhouses together today, they'd cover an area the size of Manhattan.
Farming under glass, another example of Dutch ingenuity.
Then, a huge discovery in 1959. The vast Groningen gas field would offer greenhouse horticulture a huge boost. Farmers profited from the cheap energy as their crops benefited from the heat and the added CO2. The Netherlands now has the world's highest yields per hectare for cucumbers, chili peppers and tomatoes, all carefully picked for their profitability. Reducing water use is part of making efficiencies too. Today, some farms use just 4 litres to grow a kilo of glasshouse tomatoes. The global average is 214 litres. All this built on a rich culture of farming that already existed. The Dutch were master breeders of plants and livestock and were a nation of traders thanks to the ports at Rotterdam and Amsterdam. The state built on this expertise to transform farming, including a focus on education and research, as part of a holistic approach to benefiting the entire industry. It hasn't all been good though. The Dutch have been criticised for getting ahead with over-intensive methods and using synthetic fertilisers to boost production. They're now working to change this. In 1999, the country used more fertiliser than any other European country, spreading on average 500 kilos per hectare. By 2014 though, that figure had more than halved. By working together, farmers, scientists, businesses and the state turned the Netherlands into a world leader in modern farming. Its knowledge and state-of-the-art technology will be vital in tackling the future of a rising global population with billions more mouths to feed.
Speaking of good things coming out of adversity, after COVID-19 hit this year, there was huge concern about how and if we were going to be able to source our food, given that the food economy is global in scale and borders were closing daily. Hence the resurgence of victory gardens and the emphasis on reconnecting with our food supply and a re-examination of how and if we should continue to rely on a system that is so subject to disruption. People began planting gardens again in unprecedented numbers, and community garden initiatives gained popularity and participation rose dramatically. Our population growth is outstripping our ability to feed our exploding populations, giving the finite amount of arable farmland, particularly in arid climates. Vertical farming can change that by utilizing controlled environment agriculture methods and removing environmental conditions from the equation. At Babylon, our focus has been on creating technology that is both affordable and much more sophisticated than what was available in the marketplace when we started out. We can farm through the cloud, a repository for digital knowledge and platforms that have the potential to change the landscape of farming forever. Today, greenhouses all over the world provide crops as varied as ornamental flowers to specialty vegetables. Modern hydroponics, the science of growing plants using nutrient-enriched water instead of soil, is a field, pun intended, that has expanded and began adapted to prove better agricultural options in places where conventional agriculture is not a viable option. Iceland, for example, has such a short growing season that greenhouses are the norm in order to provide sufficient food produced locally rather than relying on imported products. The greenhouses are heated using geothermal energy and powered using hydroelectric power, reflecting Iceland's commitment to renewable energy. Hydroponics, as a sustainable, ecologically responsible, and efficient farming alternative, has long been part of Iceland's farming practice, extending to growing specialty crops like wasabi as profitable export crops. Elsewhere in the world, arid climates make it impossible to cultivate crops. And because hydroponics is a contained system that uses 94 less water than conventional farming, it is a fast-growing choice for desert nations that need to feed their citizens. The latest development in indoor farming that has had an enormous impact is the use of vertical farming systems, where the farms are tiered vertically instead of expanding horizontally. Think about how many more people skyscrapers hold than a sprawling one-story building. Vertical farms are the skyscrapers of farming. The vertical structure allows the building to have the same footprint size, but yields increase dramatically because of the additional growing area created by building up. The largest vertical farm complexes have very high ceilings, and harvesting is done with lifts. Some are even starting to use robotics. Now I hope you enjoy this video about what we're doing at Babylon and our mission.
Did you know that over 40% of fresh produce goes to landfill before it is consumed? Or by the time the produce reaches your plate, it could have traveled over 1,500 miles from anywhere around the world. Using hydroponics, we're able to grow crops using 90% less water than traditional methods, and a single microfarm can grow produce and save 6,000 gallons of water per year. As we look to build a sustainable future, there is a lot of unknown. But one thing we know for sure is that we have to find a more efficient way to grow food and eliminate the wasteful supply chain. We started Babylon with a simple mission: to help people grow food, anywhere, wherever they are around the world. We're now able to use our platform to deliver a simple and engaging growing experience, allowing anyone to grow fresh produce at the push of a button. The technology we've developed reconnects people with their food, allowing them to grow fresh, healthy produce using less space, fewer resources, and reducing their impact on the environment. By growing healthy and sustainable food on-site and on-demand, we're giving organizations the power to take control of their supply of fresh produce, to create shared value for their communities and the environment. We know that vertical farming is just a small part of the solution, but the platform we've created gives businesses the opportunity to be proactive, and together all of our micro farms will have a big impact.
Babylon invented a proprietary platform that uses artificial intelligence, machine learning, and camera vision for vertical farming. Our platform enables anyone to grow fresh, nutritious produce on-site through the use of our technology, combined with a mobile app that controls all the farm's operations. Vertical farms are controlled agricultural environments, and thus are not subject to variation in weather or seasons, allowing year-round cultivation of crops. Our farms are the size of a large bookcase, 3 feet deep, 5 feet wide, and 8 feet tall. Each have a total of 75 square feet of growing area that has the equivalent production capacity of 2,000 square feet of conventional farmland. We are increasing agricultural productivity dramatically by designing an efficient, easily managed farming model that can be used anywhere. This makes the distance from farm to fork mere feet instead of miles, and we are proud to be part of helping to make our food as local as it can be. This concludes the presentation part of our webinar. I'll now turn it over to my colleagues. Thank you so much for tuning in and spending time with me today. It's been lovely.